This is a new one. I'm excited to do this one.
Oh, good. All right. Well, everybody, last session in the collaboration track today, we have Shari, who's doing back-to-back sessions. She just finished talking about the 3 C's of Microsoft Teams. She's now going to be talking about beyond work. What goes where? Let's talk about document strategy. And in the conversation prior to her, we were kind of talking through this, and she goes like, I'm sick and tired of telling people like individually how to do this. This is a session for those people. So I think this is one of those things that I think you guys are going to get a lot of good information from. As always, make sure you guys are putting questions, comments in chat. If you're doing that, you get the possibility of getting a $25 gift card, except for those people who've already previously won. But thank you for all that. Keep on doing the interaction. Don't forget about live captioning, and make sure you do that survey at the end so you can get that Surface Go. So take it away, Shari.
Woohoo! All right. So thank you all for sticking around to the end of what a amazing day of sessions. I know I'm looking forward to all the recordings. I actually had to go turkey hunting this morning with my daughter-in-law because turkeys showed up at Costco, so I missed a bunch of sessions. So I'm going to go back and watch those recordings, but hopefully y'all are getting ready for the Thanksgiving holiday next week. I know I'm very thankful for so much this year. Be sure to tweet out, not just today, but the nuggets and the information that you got and the speakers that you liked, and also use the hashtags as well. And if you're watching the recordings, keep that going, because this workshop day, they do it twice a year. It's one of my favorite events to do because it's really focused on a little bit higher level most of the time, and gives more than just the technical information that we get at some of the conferences that they're a little more technical. As always, want to thank the sponsors. We see the same recurring sponsors at many events, and we wouldn't have these without them. And they continue to support us even though they're not in person anymore and maybe don't get as much of a benefit. But hopefully we'll all get back in person soon, and we can thank them in person, but check them out and see what they have to offer for you. All right, so again, this is a new session. And Don and I were talking, I was letting him know, I was like, my whole strategy is to work smarter, not harder. And for those of you as well, and this is something every client that I work with, I have the same conversation over and over and over. They're completely confused about where their documents go when they're moving to Office 365. They're deprecating their servers and they want everybody to move, and they dump everything in OneDrive and make a big mess. They're not considering everything they need to when they're deciding where those documents go. And so instead of repeating myself, I'm actually creating a course. There'll be a video-based course about this. That QR code and the link that I had in the link earlier in the chat earlier. If you want to know when that course is available, I would be happy to let you know. And if you weren't in the last session, I 100% respect your privacy. I don't share or sell information. It's just a means of communicating with you. And if you want to opt out at any time, you feel free to do so. All right, so we're going to talk documentation strategy. The most common question I get when I'm working with people and they're moving into Office 365 is what goes in OneDrive, what goes in SharePoint, and what goes in Teams. And there are lots of presentation sessions out there that cover that. It's like what goes where. The thing to keep in mind is that Teams is actually built on a SharePoint site. The files that are in there come from SharePoint. When you're working in chat, those files are stored in your OneDrive. So when you are talking documentation strategy, you really only have two places, or two, I want to call them repositories, where those files are stored. So we're going to explore those today. So not just what goes where, but why. And who am I? I'm Shari Oswald. They call me shortcut Shari. I've been using SharePoint since before it was even called SharePoint. It was called Microsoft Content Management Server before when Microsoft first bought it. And it really was just the means of an intranet. And eventually it turned into a huge document dump. And again, people did not plan or organize or strategize on how that documentation was stored. So that's why I'm passionate about this. I don't like a mess. I don't like digging through a mess, and nobody else does either. Feel free to reach out to me. The hardest thing to remember is how to spell my name. Is Shari. My joke is that I answer to any spelling, but the internet isn't quite as forgiving as that. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. I'm a Microsoft Office Specialist Master, and I'm also a qualified CIE facilitator, if you're familiar with those events. I'm also a boot camp trainer for those as well. Been doing those for about 11 years. All right, I'm also a LinkedIn Learning author, and that link right there will give you a free trial. I have 3 courses that are currently published on SharePoint. The communication site probably would do well for a refresh, but it's still relevant and still very popular, so you want to check that one out. And again, that link right there will give you a free, I think it's 30 days that you can trial in there. All right, and for today, for all of you amazing people, we have a on-demand learning platform that I'm an author for. I did, like, if you're an Access person, I did like 9 hours on Microsoft Access 2019, but we have all of Office, all of Microsoft 365 in manageable bites, and I'm happy to offer you a trial of that, a 10-day trial. So if you want to fill out that survey, also where you would ask if, let me know if you want to be on my mailing list and be up to date. I do Tip Tuesdays every Tuesday. And if you want to know when those are coming out, I can definitely send those out to you. Okay, so when you are talking about documentation strategy, let's start with what you need to consider when you're looking at your documentation. It's not just what goes in SharePoint, what goes in OneDrive, and what goes in Teams. You need to consider where that document is in its life cycle. You need to decide who needs to work with that document or has to have access to that document. One big thing that I see a lot is when you're coming from like a network drive, is that the file names and the filing structures are inconsistent. As the people have moved in and out of a function, a job, or a department in an organization, they all have a different way of filing things and different way of naming things. And we need to find a consensus and a consistency about that to make sure that people can find what they need. How long do those documents live? So do they need to be reviewed? If you have a policy, how often are those documents reviewed and the old ones gotten rid of? And there's legal ramifications for that because, for example, my previous life, I was in human resources. If somebody can find an old policy and they're operating on that policy that now opens you up to some kind of litigation, if they can find it, you're liable for it. So we want to make sure that people can only find what they need and that those documents are being reviewed and cleaned out. And then finally, the retention requirements. We're going to go through each of these as we go along. Do these documents need to be kept? Now, my name is Shari and I'm a digital hoarder. I have 2 terabyte hard drives that are 2 4 terabyte hard drives, so 8 terabytes of storage. And finally, last year, I had the opportunity to go through my content. I had courseware from Office 2000. It's 20 years old. Why do I have that? Well, in an organization, you might legally be required to keep that, or it might have some historical value that is for your company. So what are the retention requirements around those documents? And each of these things, as you're taking them into consideration, determine where those files live and how you manage them. Now, keeping in mind, I have 90 minutes with you to go over something that I could probably spend 2 days on. So we're going to start with document state. So your documentation lifecycle, and this is going to be a graphic that kind of builds. Your documents have 3 stages in their lifecycle. They have an authoring stage, they have a publishing stage, and they have a retention stage. So as you're creating your documents and you have different versions and you're collaborating on them, we need to place where we can work together and either work on our own or work together and co-author and collaborate. So where would that file go to live? Once those documents are ready for other people to see, we don't want them in our workspace. We don't want them, putting their little fingers in the content that we're working on that may be living, for other purposes. So we only want to give them the current versions of documents. So let's say, for example, we're working on the employee handbook. It's being revised. I'm going to keep that in the authoring layer, and the HR team is going to be working on that. Benefits and legal may need to work on it with us as well. So we need to have a place where we can work on that. But once it's published, we need to put it into a place where people can find only that published version. at that particular time, right? But that that employee manual could evolve from that point. So we may have two copies. We have the authoring layer, we have that copy, and we have the publishing layer. Now, once that new one is released, what do we do with the old ones? Can we just throw it away? Maybe, maybe not. But usually there's legal requirements because somebody who was hired 10 years ago agreed to a different set of rules. And that may need to be kept around for a legal reason for 10 years in some cases, 7 years for financial, or it could be like your company annual report or something that you keep forever because you want to have that for historical significance. So keeping in mind the authoring, the publishing, and the retention stages of your document lifecycle. Okay. So when I'm talking about authoring, I'm talking about work in progress. What are those files that we are currently working on? Do we have, do we require versioning? Do we need to track the versions? So, you know, if I'm doing a presentation for like this that I'm going to do for an event next week, I don't need to keep track of the version history, but sometimes we need to keep track of those versions for historical or legal purposes. So there's certain things when you're authoring your document, I'm not going to do that employee manual in my OneDrive because I can't track the versions. It needs to be somewhere where I can author and also where other people can work on it with me. Your publishing layer, again, is just the current version. And then the retention layer is the content that you keep for historical or compliance purposes. Right. So in that space, we have active documents. These are their states during those stages. When they're in the authoring layer, they are active. When they are in the publishing layer, they are read-only. And then when they are in the retention layer, they're in the archive state, which again is read-only and marked as a record. So we have, again, kind of building the graphic, keeping this in mind, authoring, publishing, and retention equates to active, read-only, and archive. Where are your documents on their life cycle? And we're going to find a home for them. So our next option that we want to consider is where are we going to store that content? Where's the best place for that information to live? In Microsoft 365, again, the three questions that I get are OneDrive, SharePoint, or Microsoft Teams. And yes, Microsoft Teams is the front end, but it's not the actual storage repository. Content only lives in OneDrive or SharePoint. So in OneDrive, I always give the analogy that this is that file cabinet that sits underneath your desk. You have control over it. You own that documentation. You have the key to the cabinet. At any point, I can pull content out of that cabinet, hand it to Michelle. Michelle can work on her stuff. And then, you know, I may take it back and lock it back up and take it away from her. But it lives in my drawer. I've given her access to my drawer. I decide how it's organized. Do I have folders in there? Now, I always tell people, you know, when you're creating your folder structure, we're going to keep the 3-click rule in mind, and we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. All right. So it's my personal documents. So are these things that I reference all of the time, the content that I need, content that I'm going to do peer-to-peer collaboration with, not formal groups. This is going to be informal peer-to-peer collaboration. SharePoint has multiple types of sites that we're going to talk about. At the very basic, there are two layouts. There's a communication site and a team site. So when you're working in your files, if you need to work with other people and have more open communication, collaboration, and access, you're going to store that in a SharePoint site. Microsoft Teams stores files in two different ways, your chat files and your Teams files. So keeping in mind, and we covered this in the last session, chat files, chat equals OneDrive. When you share a file in chat, it shares it from your OneDrive. If somebody else shares a file in the same chat, that file coming from their OneDrive. It does not create or establish a shared storage location where those files now commingle. We've each just kind of opened the drawer that sits underneath our desk and taken the files into a conference room and are working on them together. Okay. Teams files, on the other hand, are kept in SharePoint. So when you create a Microsoft team, it creates a SharePoint site behind the scenes with a standard documentation library where that content is stored. So when we're authoring, we're going to either store it in OneDrive, SharePoint, or Teams, because that's where we are actively working on that documentation. Okay. In Teams, that content is in the document library. That's the standard library in the site. So let me just show you what that looks like. I'm going to close all these tabs. All right, so I'm going to go to SharePoint. And I'm just going to pick the Mark 8 project team out of my SharePoint site and show you that there are lots of content. This is a full SharePoint site that can be built out to help you to collaborate and share information however you need to. If I go to the settings menu and choose site contents, you can see we have multiple document libraries in this site. One of them is documents and the other one's presentations. So if I go to documents, notice the folders that are in here by default: design, digital assets, web, general, go to market, Mark 8 website, product, and research and development. If I go to Teams and go to the Mark 8 project team, notice my channels: general, design, digital assets, web, go to market, and research and development. When you create a channel in a team, it creates a corresponding folder in that standard document library that sits behind the scenes. This is your work in progress. Okay, I want you to tuck that away because this is what comes up constantly. Let's say we have the go-to-market plan and we have 500 documents in here in the go-to-market plan. Eventually, that's unusable. These documents don't have to live here forever. If you were in Matt's session, the keynote, he was talking about move your documents based on what stage they're at. Just because it started out here doesn't mean it has to live here forever. Okay, so when you're working on this, is only the authoring content in the documents library in Microsoft Teams. Okay, we're going to talk about publishing here in a little bit, but I want you to kind of tuck that away. This is work in process. This in here is work in process, right? After it's done, I'm going to give you some options for making this so that you don't have 10,000 documents in one library and a SharePoint site that can actually be built out to be more usable. Okay. There we go. All right. So when we're authoring, we're looking at Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive. Let's talk about the, where's the publishing layer? Oh, one of my slides didn't show. Oops. Oh, there's it. Okay, this is the slide that like blipped out and disappeared. All right, so here's the other one. When we're publishing, we're going to publish in SharePoint. And when we're retaining that documentation, we're going to put it in a SharePoint library. All right, so let's talk about the publishing layer. The publishing layer can be in multiple places. Let's say it's that presentation that we were working on. Maybe I've got the go-to-market plan, and this Mark 8 elevator pitch is now completed. I don't necessarily want people working on that document or working on it anymore, because by default in Teams, every single person that has access to this library has the exact same permissions on this document. And that means if we decide this is finalized, I could rename it and put final on the end of it. That doesn't help because somebody could still get in there and edit it. In Teams, I cannot lock that file down. So if I go into the here, right, here's the assets for that elevator pitch that we were creating. I have remnants of things that were helping to create that presentation. Where do I put those? Right? So when you're creating your content, the authoring layer is where you have the working pieces and parts that you need. But after you're done, do we want to leave that all in here that's gumming up the system? Maybe I don't need these anymore. I can get rid of them because I created the deck and I don't need the graphics anymore. Or I may need to file them away somewhere else. So what do we do with that content? Do we create another channel that says final presentations? No, because guess what? You're just creating another folder in the exact same library that you were working in before. So here is my suggestion for you. If it is just for your team, like nobody else needs to see this presentation, we're going to go out to that SharePoint site and build it out with additional libraries. So maybe I go out here and I say, I'm going to add an app. And they put it under this weird link that doesn't even look like a link. It says classic experience. You can add an app and add a document library. And the reason I'm showing you this is you also have, and here we have picture libraries and we have other libraries. So we'll just type in library. So you have a site assets library, you have a form library, you have picture libraries, which the picture library is helpful for those visual assets that you have because you can put in additional metadata around the picture. So if you think about it, when I store a document, I want to know the name of the document, the title of the document, who created the document, when it was created, right? But pictures are a little bit different. I want to know, what is the subject of the picture? What's the content in there? What would the alternative text be for that picture? What is how do I search for content? What product is that picture of? So I'm going to create a picture library instead and call it, let's say, go to market assets. So I have a separate picture library and to store that content in. Notice I also have a presentations library that already has some presentations in it. So after I'm done creating my presentation, I'm going to move that over here into this library. This library has unique permissions, and you can, when you create a library, you can set up this library to be only read only for their content without having to go in and alter the actual file. So if I go to the, I'm going to go to the library settings. And the permissions for this document library. And typically, when you create a library, it has the exact same permissions as the site itself. So I actually had done this in a demo the other day and I forgot. So right now, this is what it looks like. Manage parent or stop inheriting permissions. So right now, everybody has contribute access to this library. I want to make these read only. So I'm going to stop inheriting the parent permission and then change. So I'm going to take everybody but the owners. So I don't ever kill the permission of the owner. Can you tell I've done that? I've killed my own permissions in a library because I was in the owner group. And I'm going to edit the permissions for all of those people and make it read only. Restricted view you can actually do as well. It lets them view it online, but it does not let them download it. Read only, they can still download the documents. You need to choose between the two, whether you want people to be able to download a copy of a presentation. So maybe they want to use that presentation as the basis of another one. You might want them to be able to download it without editing your original one. All right, so when we go back to our main document library, after we're done working and creating that presentation, I'm going to, let's say, move this one, going to move it over to the presentation library. So this is a Mark 8 project team presentations. And I might want to go into the, what is it, digital assets? Nope. I'm looking for those graphics here. Here's the graphics. And I'm going to move these over to the, oh, it doesn't give me the picture library. Interesting. All right, that might be a little more of a challenge. All right, so may have to download and upload them, put them in that other library if I needed to. So you're going to move them out because I don't need them in my work in process anymore. It's done. Okay, so that's internal. Now, how does that help me in Teams? I still want to be able to access that content and from that library. Remember, the teams are who needs to work together, what are they working on, and the tabs across the top are the access to the content they need to get their job done. So I can still, even though that SharePoint library is no longer in the main library where it says files, you can add additional libraries. I'm going to click the plus here and go to the SharePoint option. And I'm going to choose the presentations and click Save. And I have the presentations link here, and these are read-only access for everyone. Doesn't mean they're hidden, they don't go away. We can still surface them where it makes sense within Teams on its own tab, without it having to be yet another channel that we have to manage and files that we have to try and manage individually. So any questions on that? Or any ooh, ah moments like, yeah, that's what I had somebody that did tell me, you just changed my life. Yeah, Ernest, it takes about 30 minutes to show. Thanks, Ernest. So I had the presentation library already queued up already. That one is new, so hopefully that'll show up here in a second. It's that crawl that happens in our demo environments. Okay, so when you're talking about publishing, I'm publishing to a specific team at this point, okay? What if my audience is the whole organization? I don't want them in my SharePoint site. I don't want them in that library. If I were to go out to SharePoint and go to that presentations library and click share on this library, it's going to break the permissions and cause some issues. I don't want people having that here, right? So let's go to I think there's an HR site. Let's go back here. They changed the demo content, so I'm like, oh, I hope it's still here. All right, so let's go to the landing, for example. So the landing in this environment is their intranet. Everybody in the organization has access to this site, and the content that I would want people to be able to access, the published versions of things. When I am designing an architecture for the organization, it's usually based on function. And so the HR department's going to have their own, marketing department's going to have their own. So the HR site is going to have their own site where they publish that document. So if I go into the sales, let's go. I think these links are all dead. So if I had something for sales or that the whole organization needed to know about, for example, I might go into this site. Again, let's look at their site contents. Here are all the document libraries that are here. So things that belong to anyone in the organization, forms that they may need to fill out to request a conference room, or travel request forms that anybody in the organization would need that the executive level handles. I'm going to put that at this level of their site structure. This is a communication site. The intent of a communication site is sharing information. It's not collaboration, it's communication. So I might maybe I create a new library. So from here, we can do new document library because I don't need a special library. I just need a document library. I'm going to call it corporate forms. And the published version of that form is going to go at this level. That allows me to, when I'm working on my navigation, I need to find it. I can go into here and add, a time off request form or whatever those links allows me to give an open link to anybody in the organization to that particular file. But where is the working copy? This is the published copy of that form. Do I want to put the only copy out there? No. Where do you guys think I would have that the working copy, if it needed to be updated or changed, where do you think I would have that file? Put it in the chat for me. Do we need to keep it? Nobody's in the chat.
Yeah, nobody's.
What do you think,
answering
Don?
right now.
Where would we put it?
Oh boy. Depends upon where they work and then where you want to have the final product to be available.
Exactly. Exactly. So we have SharePoint libraries, we have SharePoint sites, communication sites, and then team sites. So is it still being worked on? Is it the public version? And if we still need the authoring version of that, where would we keep it? So that's the next step in our triangle here. Who's the audience for that file? Who needs to have access to that file and at which stage? So if we're looking at our audience, there are 5 different levels, in my opinion, of who needs to see a file and when. The first one is just me. This is my stuff. It's stuff I refer to for my job. It's a schedule that I'm going to, keep track of. I don't need to share it with anybody. Informal peer groups. So this is where you're working in OneDrive and you're sharing a file with people on the fly. Formal work groups, which are basically Microsoft Teams. The whole organization, or only the people that are required to ensure compliance with your legal retention. So these are your 5 levels of audiences. And that's how they fit into this structure here. So the authoring layer you share with yourself, your informal peer groups, your formal peer groups. Okay. So you're in teams, those are going to be departments, formal groups, project groups that you're working in. Maybe it's a new a department or a subgroup of a department. So when I think of that, I always try and use HR as an example, A, because it's my background, but B, because everybody understands HR because you all work for a company or have worked for a company at some point. So when you're talking about a department, do I have an entire team for human resources and then a channel for each one of those, understanding that everybody can see everything? Or maybe employee benefits has a team and they have different channels and what they're working on there. Okay, so when I'm talking about formal groups, it doesn't have to be just the HR department. It could be the benefits group from the HR department, okay? Or projects that you're working on. For me, so that is one of those options. SharePoint is the cross-functional groups or business processes. You can have a cross-functional team, and that's one of the beauties of team if you have work in process. But if you have reference documents, do you really need a team if it's not work in process? Okay, so you could create an entire SharePoint site. Let's say benefits, like HR benefits and finance need to work together consistently. Give them a SharePoint space to work and share their files with each other. That's one reason to have that. The other is business processes. So with automation of things, let's say travel requests, right? I might create a site around employee travel, a SharePoint site that has everything about employee travel. Behind the scenes, I'm going to manage the process for requesting travel. So it'll have all the reference material for everybody if they're travelers for the organization, but they're also going to have the travel request form, which is going to be tied to a SharePoint list that's going to be automated and have processes behind it. Now, finance may need to be in there as somebody who manages pieces of that. The whole organization, anybody who travels would need to have access to that content too. So you may have some people that only have read-only access, maybe only have contribute access, and other people that have managerial access in that business process-based site, okay? And hopefully that makes sense to you. That is not going to be a Microsoft team because now we're creating channels and all of this other stuff. This is just a site that manages that process. And then OneDrive is just for your productivity files and informal collaborations, okay? When you're publishing, we're publishing that content in a communication site, or it could be, if it's just for your team, it might just be in your team's formal group. So your Microsoft Teams site or a SharePoint site, either one. Both are SharePoint libraries, which is why the SharePoint icon is there. Now, the retention layer is a little bit different. This is content that should not be accessible to anyone unless they have a legal need to see it. So when you have the old versions of your employee handbook, when you have the strategic plans for your organization for the last 30 years, no one should be able to find that. That content is there for legal or historical purposes. So I always create a completely separate SharePoint site collection that manages that document. Now, in the classic world, I would use a record center because you mark it as a record, and that helps you create the self-cleaning oven. So you create content types and processes and automation around those content types to ensure that it's periodically cleaned out as it should be. They don't have the equivalent of that yet in the modern sites. So they are still available as a classic template, but I don't know how supported those are. I haven't implemented one of those directly in a long time. But anytime you have documents that need to be retained, let's say we have the retention center. In that retention center, maybe I have document libraries for HR, documents for finance, whatever. You create multiple document libraries and you assign the workflows around it that help you make sure that it gets cleaned out when it's supposed to. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about is filing and names, and this is definitely one of my hot buttons. I'll give an example right now. I'm working with a chiropractic office, and the husband and wife have been running this practice for 30 years. Their son has now graduated and is now a doctor in the office. And they've had multiple office assistants in and out over the years, and every single person has filed everything differently. They've named it differently. So let's say, for example, I go in as a patient and they need to find my x-ray from 10 years ago from a car accident that I had, because now maybe I'm having issues from it again. Did they file it by patient name? Did they file it by date? Did they file it by type of file? They can't find things because each one of them has a different way that they logically think. So they need to come together and decide what that's going to look like. So when you are preparing your files to move to Office 365, there are 4 things you need to do in order to get ready for that. You are moving into the web. There are things about web environments that are not friendly like they were in network drives and hard drives in that space. So we need to make sure that we make them ready and make them findable. So the first stage is to delete. Delete, take out the trash. Get rid of that stuff that you don't need. The big client that I had here that we moved to Office 365, they had previously been paying for storage. And after we did a report and found all the redundant files, they were actually paying 40% of what their storage cost was garbage, because they had, each person had downloaded a copy of their own file and put it here and put it there and put it here. Well, now the new version is out and they download that one too. And guess what? The old one should have been thrown away, but they didn't. They had duplicated content or obsolete content everywhere. And this costs your company money. If you're not actually paying for storage, you're paying for people's time when they're trying to find something and they're digging through the trash trying to find what's relevant, right? You have compliance issues. There's certain things that you should not be keeping beyond a certain point based on what your compliance requirements are for your industry. You have liability risk, like I talked about in HR, where you have people that if they can find old versions of policies or procedures and they're going by those because they think they're current, and then now that's opened you up to litigation. You also have data breach vulnerabilities. So the new file formats now have an X on the end of it. I can't tell you how often we do a crawl through the documents from an organization that's been around for decades, and they still have DOC and XLS and PPT files. They don't have the extensible files that are now the new format. which are not friendly in the government either. And those and they have macros that could potentially be breached, as far as, they could be, some evil person in the world could find a way to get into those or cause a problem. So we want you to, when you're looking at your documents, you need to look at them with the ROT formula. Is this redundant? Is this outdated or obsolete? Or is it trivial? Right. So redundant, copies of copies of copies. Is it the document, like the policy, let's say this is a travel policy V1, travel policy V2, that travel policy V2 with comments from Bob, with, all of that. Which one is the right one, and keep the right one. If it's redundant, get rid of it. Once it's been finalized, get rid of the old ones. We don't need them anymore. Is it a policy that is no longer in place, right? That could be something that we get rid of. We don't need to keep it if we don't have to have it for historical or legal retention purposes. Or trivial. In the crawl that we did, we love our office assistants. I don't know how anybody can function without their office assistants, but how many of your old potluck lunch sign-up sheets do you need to keep? Why do we have the pictures from your child's birthday party in the file storage for your job, right? This is stuff that should be getting rid of. And obviously keep your pictures, but don't keep them in your company storage. So is it redundant? Is it outdated? Or is it obsolete? Things we need to keep in mind. All right, the update piece. Are these supported file types? Do you have legacy documentation that is a DOCX, right? We just did a migration last year for a company that was based in Phoenix, and they said, just dump. They're like, just dump everything. Just take everything from this M drive and put it over here. There 10,000 documents that are in folders, subfolders, and more subfolders, and more subfolders. And they had special characters in them. Well, when I was like, all right, everything goes. And then I started getting errors from my migration tool saying, this is an error, this is an error. Somebody had updated their hard drive to their M drive, and their entire hard drive was uploaded to the M drive. So all the system files, the Microsoft Windows, all of that was part of it. Those are not supported file types. But you know how much time we spent and they paid us to move that garbage? Yeah, show me what you want to keep. You need to go through this stuff and not just take everything from storage space A to storage space B and think it's going to work well. So make sure it's relevant and it's supported file types. Second is the current file formats. Make sure that you are up to date, not only in your Office 365, but if you have other files that are kept, the SharePoint libraries store hundreds of document types. Some of them are more friendly than others. One that I keep getting asked about recently is Access databases. Access database does not have a web-based tool. When you open something from a SharePoint storage library, it opens it default in the browser. There is no browser version of Access. So they're like, oh, we can't use this file, it's corrupted. It's like, nope, in order to use it, you have to download it to your computer, have access on your computer, and upload it from there. These are not files that you can use. There was at one point a SharePoint or an Access web for the web or online in one of the versions. It's not a thing anymore. All right, so make sure that your file formats are up to date, including your PDFs. And I say that because the security that comes to play in the old file, as evil people get more evil and progress in their evilness, we have had to update security in our files and our file structures and the protocols that are included in those. So if you have old PDF files, you may want to update them so that they have the right security capabilities in there, right? There is a way to mass update, using the Adobe tools if you need. I'm using that as an example. But also for the optical character recognition. The beauty of your content in the web-based version is everything is searchable. But you have to make it findable. If in the old PDF versions, it basically was like a snapshot or a picture of your documentation. Unless you've actually gone through and done the OCR, optical character recognition, in those documents, the content of them won't be searchable. The titles will be, but the content won't. So if you really want to maximize the ability to find your content, you need to go into those documents and update them to the current file formats and make sure, you know, things that you want to be searchable are searchable. All right. Any questions or comments on that? Sydney's got a comment about thousands of dollars moving from Lotus 123 to Outlook. Yes. You know, if everybody does their part and cleans their stuff out, that's really helpful. All right, let's talk about your file structures. Does this look familiar? This is what I see all the time. So let's say Assistant Susie worked here for 3 years, and she filed things by company, and then by proposals, and then by year, and then by contracts, and then whether it was signed or not, right? Then, you know, Bobby comes in, and now he's the assistant, and he files them by the type of file, then by the company, then by what type of thing, and then, oh, these are the old ones. And then we get into the file names. This is a proposal. It was revised. This one was revised on its final. This one's the final, and this one was signed. So what is the right document? If I were to go back and look at this, I can't search by date. I can't search by if it was a contract or not a contract. So when you're thinking of your file names, it's really, really important to make sure that you pick 2 to 3 things that are unique about that document to include in the name so that it's easily identifiable. All right. So when you're using naming conventions, you are going to speed up your search. You're going to be able to sort and filter consistently. And just from that, looking at the file name, you should be able to figure out what it is. So the example I like to use is in my courseware, my 2000 courseware that I got rid of last year. Even looking back at those, I could tell just from the file name what it was because I have my decoder ring. My filing structure, I had the first 2 characters were the author or the vendor. So MS for Microsoft, AD for Adobe, right? Then the next 4 characters would be the product. So it'd be WRD for Word, XLS or EXCL for Excel, Acro for Acrobat. So the next 4 characters. Then I would have the version. So is it 2010, 2013? So within 12 characters, the way I built my my file names, I could tell exactly what those files were. And I want to show you something in SharePoint that is really important to know when you're working and creating your file structure. You don't have to put everything in the name. So if I go back out to a document library, let's say I have a presentation that we're working on. I'm going to go into here. Instead of it being product launch, which tells me nothing, right? Product launch for what? For what date? You know, was it a pre-launch, a post-launch? What was this? I'm going to rename this and make it more usable. So let's say this is the 2020. And it's going to be the M400 and launch. And maybe the launch was in Orlando. How much more useful is that file name? Pick 2 to 3 things that make that file unique. And so I can sort by that file. I can search by the product. I can say, okay, what products did we launch in Orlando? Just from that file name, I can tell what that looks like. Now, here's what I usually see. People confuse the difference between the name and the title. The title of this document, if I look at the properties, we have a name and we have a title. Usually what I see is this. Because they have used a template to create their presentation, and the template had the title of PowerPoint presentation. Right. The title is the pretty name for that file. So if I were to put in here the 2020 M400 launch extravaganza. I don't know. Extravaganza, if I could spell, right? This title I can change over and over and over again. The title doesn't, what it changes to doesn't matter. Maybe this is where I put in the draft. That's the draft version of that document, okay? I'm not going to change the name, and I'll tell you why. Every time you change the name of the document, you lose your version history. So that what you name your document, it should stay the name forever, because I don't have to put V1, V2, revised on 11/18, revised on 10/18/18. I don't have to do that because SharePoint keeps track of that for me. And if you check the document out, so I'm going to check it out. Make modifications. Notice that it's got a little checked out marker. After I've made those changes and I check it back in, by checking it out, nobody else can edit that. Let's say I updated the graphics and added the stats. Okay, I'm going to check that in. Now my version history is actually usable, because it's not just time-stamped and who edited it, it's what actually changed in that document. So tracking the version history, don't do it in your name. Let SharePoint do that for you, okay? SharePoint tracks by default many things, okay? What's in the name? Make it unique. Name versus title. The default attributes that are tracked are created date, modified date, who created it, and who last modified it, and the version number, among other things. This is very oversimplified if I were to show you all the attributes that are in there. If there's anything else that you think would be helpful, you can create metadata around that document that will let you search for and find it. So I'm going to go back to that library now. Instead of just having it be a presentation, let's add columns. Let's say, what product is this for? So I'm just going to, for simplicity, I'm just going to make these text. So what product is it for? Maybe I want another one for the event date. And how about one for the presenter? Like, who presented this one? So this is going to be the presenter, and make this a person or group. And I could say, were there multiple presenters? I may want to allow multiple. And again, always put in the description, please select a presenter for this deck. Click OK. Right now, my properties, I'm going to show the information panel. Now I can track more about that document than just the name and just the title. So this is for the M400. Let's say the date is, the launch event is next week. And the presenter, oops, is Megan. So guess what? Everything that I just added becomes a way that I can search, I can sort, I can create views around, and be able to find content a whole lot easier than just having a file that says launch, product launch. That does nothing for anyone, right? The magic of SharePoint and OneDrive is the ability to do that. Now, let me kind of make a connection there for you. When you go to OneDrive, OneDrive does not have that same capability. I cannot check it out. I can't check it in. It has versioning, but it has high-level versioning only. Excuse me one second. Dry throat. All right, so it has high-level versioning only. So you don't have as much control. So even though it's something that I'm working on in OneDrive, it might just be me. Maybe I need it in a SharePoint library that only I have access to instead, because I need all of that too. I need to have the check-in, the check-out, the versioning, the workflows, and all those things behind it. So determining where you're going to author and work on that document is really important. And it could be based on the features that you need. All right. So the magic of metadata, I can't say this enough. When I worked for one of my first careers, I worked for a catering department in a hotel. And the hotel wasn't even open yet. It was here in the Springs. And our director of catering, when she was getting everything ramped up, she wanted everything filed by the client name. There were 3 things about each of those events for the catering department that were unique. Who the client was, the date of the event, and the type of the event. Was it, is it the Air Force Academy? Was it a hail and farewell party? What was the date of the event? Was it a wedding? The names. So when she came in, because we were trying to build the clientele, we had different accounts, and she wanted the whole drawer. When the Air Force Academy came in, she wanted all of those files in one place. Okay, great. Then she'd have to do her report by month. So I'd have to go through the drawer and pull everything out of those groupings of the client by date. Okay, well, then the wedding person would come in and go, well, they're all in here alphabetical, but which ones are the weddings? So we had to come up with a way. We used different colored folders in order to identify what type of event it was, but still not easy. Well, then the next director of catering in says, hey, I have to do my reports by month. I want everything by date. So then the Air Force Academy would come in, and I'd have to go through the entire drawer and pull all the files out of, and did we know if any were missing? I don't know, because there was no standard, right? So what I'm getting to there is when you lock yourself down to a folder structure, you don't have flexibility of how you find, sort, filter, or find things. If we had a document library that had, for those, let's say we had events in here, and our metadata was, who's the client, what's the date of the event, and then I could get just a quick list of all the events or all the weddings or whatever, just like this. So when you lock it down to a file structure, you end up having to dig around way too much. So metadata, metadata, metadata. I can't beat that drum loud enough. And coming up with, when you're creating metadata, I said, don't ask people 20 questions. They won't do it. Find 3 to 4, maybe 5 things that are unique that you would want to filter, sort, and view that content by, and then be able to search for it by that as well, because you can create search scopes that are custom for certain things as well. So let's do this better. What is unique about these files that would make it easier for us to find, right? Now, if we were in person, I'd have you do a little exercise on the board and say, how would we rename this file? We have 2 different file types. We have proposals. We have the client. We have the date it was revised. So what is it that SharePoint doesn't track for us so that we couldn't put in another thing that can be part of the name? So my example would be, okay, this is maybe a file type might be, PRO for proposal, underscore XYZ, company for the client, underscore, and then you maybe, what is this, the proposal? Is this the contract is signed? So you decide, don't use folders, put what you can in the name, and then reorganize that content before you move it into the web, because it's a whole lot easier to move when you're still on-prem than when you're in the web. All right. So folder or not to folder? This is the question. Folders are bad, but they do have a place. Matt said that earlier too. They do have a place. Sometimes you need a structure that provides, it's easy to navigate, and they're high level enough content that it's not just going to be in the name, and it's not going to be an attribute that you put in metadata. You do need a folder. I still use them too, but we need to flatten that as much as possible. There's actually this, let me just bring this up again. If I go into this document library and we look at this link for this document, look at right here already, the length of the URL that it takes just to get to this library. When you are in the web environment, the beautiful connection where I can go into this document and open it in PowerPoint, So if I get the link here, open. Okay, from here. Open in the desktop app and live edit this document and have it post back and synchronize directly to that library. This beautiful capability breaks if the URL exceeds 255 characters. So every layer of a folder that you put in, the length of your file name, if you have, folders upon folders upon folders, or subsites in some cases, people are still doing subsites. I still think there's a place for subsites. I know, blasphemy. But every time we do that, we potentially will break that capability of being able to work in that document. So you want to keep your folders, for technical reasons, as shallow as possible. But there's another consideration on that. There's a web usability standard when you're creating a website. If you've ever created a website, I'm a webmaster. You should be able to access content or find it within 3 clicks. I get bored real fast if I can't get to the content that I need, and I'm going to leave if I have to dig and dig and dig, or I end up in a circle. You ever done what? I'm sorry, Microsoft is notorious for that. You end up in this circle and you can't ever get to what you need, right? Because people don't test their content. So the 3-click rule is that you have anything within 3 clicks. So let's look at how that looks in the paper world. In the paper world, you have a file drawer, right? It's a file cabinet that's sitting there. You open the drawer, you have a hanging file, or a pendaflex as they're called too. Inside the hanging file, you have a manila folder, and then you have the file. So if I were to land in that library, click, 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 within 3 clicks, I have those files, right? In SharePoint and OneDrive, you have your document library. You have a folder, maybe a subfolder, and then your file. So your goal is to mirror that paper thing, because we would never put a manila folder inside of a manila folder inside of a manila folder and then put files in it, because that's not usable, right? So what can we pull out of those file folder names and make those metadata attributes that we can filter and sort by? That's the goal. I can tell a lot by just taking a glance at the way people have their stuff organized. I can tell that this is the way they're categorizing things. This is, they look at things by year. They look at things by company. They look at things by file type. Those are the things we're going to pull out and make metadata instead of it being a part of the file name or part of the file structure, okay? And then we get there within 3 clicks. And thank you, Sydney, for the hand claps. I appreciate that. I feel like I'm on the mountaintop preaching to the world right now, because I say this so much that I'm tired of hearing myself say it. All right, so document library, folder, subfolder, and file, okay? Doesn't mean you can't find other ways to organize. We're not going to ignore all those other things. We're just going to find a better way to put them in there. All right, so so the next thing is the document lifecycle review. Once you figure out who needs to see it, where it's going to be stored, who's in charge of it, rename it, reorganize it, what are we going to do about reviewing that content? Policies and procedures, documents don't live forever. They don't. That 2000 courseware is garbage, right? But there might have been concepts, and honestly, the hand in the air, the reason that I kept those around was for reference, because I had aspirations of creating my own courseware. And I realized that keeping up with all the changes is not doable anymore. So I gave up my dream of being my own courseware author, because I just don't have time to keep it up with it and teach. So content doesn't live forever. See, there's 3 things you need to keep in mind when you are looking at your files. Who owns those files? Where should they live? And who is going to be responsible for making sure they're kept up to date? You can do this with content types. So let's say one of our content types is a policy, and our company policy about policies is that policies are reviewed on a yearly basis. And if they're still good, then we put them in place. Otherwise, we look at them a year later, right? That you need to decide what the review cycle is for that content. If it's going in the retention center When do we purge it? When do we get rid of it? And as much as possible, can we automate that process so it's not people dependent? Because like me, I didn't have time to go through and weed out the garbage. I just kept moving it from one drive to the next drive, like I did those old boxes in my garage when I used to move around. Right. So how do we make sure that we stay in compliance because we are reviewing that content as it needs to be reviewed, and then automate that as much as possible? And I could spend 2 hours on content types and doing the retention rules and all of that are available in SharePoint, but it will do it for you. It becomes a self-cleaning oven. It sends you the nasty grams letting you know stuff needs to be reviewed. Guess what? You still need to review it. You still need to review it. It still hasn't been reviewed. It nags you. So those processes can be established and set up based on keywords and content types and all kinds of cool things. All right, and then the retention requirements. What do we keep? We keep the stuff that obviously we're working on. We're not talking about what we're authoring right now or what we publish right now. We're talking about the things that we have to keep legally for financial reasons. You know, the IRS, you have to keep things for 7 years. If you had, fiscal things that you need to keep as for like board reports that have to be kept for a certain period of time. Usually it's 10 years. And then, any of your corporate documentation that you need to keep for those purposes. Historical, like I worked here for the Compassion International, and they have a lot of amazing publications that they have kept as they've evolved or as an organization. And they keep that just because it's kind of sentimental and they want to look back at it. And that's fine. You just need to find a home for it and decide, how long are you really going to keep it? Some of their stuff, they told me they're like, we're keeping this forever. It's like, okay, then we need to find a place that we know forever things are kept. So we know that we don't go look there. We don't have to go review that content because we know we're keeping it forever. That's a separate place. We're not going to mix it in with the things we have to review, because then now we're digging through the stuff we don't have to review to find out what we need to review, right? Give it a home, give it its own file drawer where, that special stuff is kept. Okay, so what do you keep legally and fiscally, responsibly, historically, and sentimentally? So let's walk through some scenarios. This is kind of my fun one. All right, we have different documents here that we may want to identify where does it go, okay? I imagine that I am now looking through all of the content that I have in my M drive, X drive, J drive, whatever the drive is, and I need to decide where I'm going to put it. So I'm going to go in and say that's the 2019 holiday potluck sign up. So the questions I'm going to start asking myself, is this the current version of this document? It's from 2019. It's nothing current, so I'm going to say no. Does it require legal retention? If it's not the current version, am I legally required to keep it for any reason? No, right? It's a potluck sign up. I'm going to click no and put it in the trash, right? Decision tree. All right, which one do you guys want to do next?
Marketing plan.
The 2022 marketing plan? Okay. All right, is this the current version? It's our marketing plan for next year, so I would say yes, right?
Yep.
Do I own this file? Is this mine? Go ahead, Don.
No.
Do you? No. Okay. Who's the audience for that?
Company-wide.
Now, is it, then that's the question. Is it ready yet for the company-wide? If we're still working on it, let's say we're still working on it for next year.
So no, not yet. So
not
work
yet.
Group.
Right, okay. Then it goes in your Microsoft Teams documents, because that's where your living, working documents are going to go. We like it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Somebody else has got to speak up here. Come on, guys.
Come on, guys.
I know it's the end of the day. Come on. Just got to play a little game here.
Your job description.
Okay, so this is my job description. Is this the current version? Go ahead, Michelle.
Probably not. It depends on when you were hired.
Okay, so you're not sure. Well, maybe I need to ask a question on it. Let's assume it's the current version.
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right. Do you own this? This is like your copy that you refer to when people.
Depends where you had it. Is it in your OneDrive or did you find it on HR?
Well, exactly. So do you own this copy? Is this your reference copy from when you were, let's say this is the one that you were given when you got hired?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. All right. So then that's going to go in my OneDrive for Business because that's something I refer to just for me. I don't need to share it with anybody else, right? Good. All right. What else? Next. Who wants to unmute? Let's do one more.
Come on, Sydney, you're really talkative in chat. Why don't you play along?
How about new employment?
Sydney was very active in the
Oh,
Teams
yeah.
Online event today. All right, let's look at like.
Oh, there she is. There she is.
Which one?
What would you
Go
like,
ahead,
Shari?
Sydney.
I can't hear you. Sorry.
What's your choice?
Which one do you want? Let's do the 2015 benefit summary, right? This is 6 years old. Is this the current version?
Maybe.
Okay. 20.
Well,
it's a 20.
There's going to be medical benefits and 401k benefits and you know, the vendor might be different, but the benefits might remain the same.
Right. So each year that thing gets updated, right? So it's probably not the current version, right? Does it require legal retention? Do we need to be able to refer back to that?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So it's going to go into a SharePoint document retention center. All right. So those decision points, when you're looking at your files, you need to decide who needs to see it. Like the 2010 annual report, that's more than 11 years old. But do we need to keep it for legal reasons, and who needs to see it? Does the whole company need to see it? I'm going to put it in communication site. If nobody else needs to see it, we're going to put it in a retention center, right? So this kind of, as you're going through your files and you're deciding where they need to go, these are the questions we need to ask. Okay. All right, that ended up, this is the first time I've done this one, y'all, and it's about perfect timing, so I'm kind of impressed with myself. That worked out pretty well. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. I'm just going to put up my contact information. Like I said, I'm actually building an entire course around this. It's going to be a video-based course. If something you think you'd be interested or you think would benefit people in your organization, please let me know. I'm happy to share it. I don't know why it won't let me reshare my presentation. 1 second. Let's try that again. I'm happy to let you know. Again, I operate out of, I'm tired of repeating myself and telling people the same thing. So when I have that situation, I record a course, and that's what I'm excited about. So hopefully this is something you found valuable. I'd love to know in the chat what your aha moments were. Because again, this is the first time I've done this one. So anything any feedback you have, I'm grateful for it. Feel free to fill out the survey, and then I'll give you the free trial of the PowerBytes Learning Portal. So, using the information that's there as well. I should have put this QR code on the other slide. That would have been smarter of me. So I'll do that next time.
That's okay.
Anybody want to unmute and tell me what it was like? Yay.
I don't know. There's actually a question
Sure.
out there I don't think we covered from Bonnie Springer. She says, what are your reasons for using Subsites and SPO? We've been advising users that Subsites still have their place, but it's best to not go more than 2 to 3 levels down. What would you be your guidance?
I agree with, so Subsites for me, when I'm using content types and custom columns, mainly for the document retention center, because it's still in Classic and they have not created that in Modern. That's where I mainly use it. But it's whenever I need that hierarchy of shared information. And I know they're trying to centralize the content hub, but in my experience, it's still really clunky. It's not as clean as it was. I like being able to give like the finance department control of their site down, and when you don't have cross-site collection shared information, you really having to duplicate that or script it so that it duplicates it's just a real pain. So, but again, I'm with you on the keep it shallow. You know, maybe one level of subsites. That's about it.
Then it also looks like Adam was asking, do you have any tips or tricks for document and file flow with marketing departments that work with Adobe Suite? Mixed platforms, Mac PC as well. You've been muted somehow.
There. Teams is has an integration with the Adobe Suite. Yeah, and so I would encourage that. And then the product, you know, what they produced, then put in a SharePoint communication site if it's open. Like one of my clients right now, they have a whole marketing communication department that they have digital assets they want everybody to have. They're not going to let them into their team to see that. We've created a communication site for them to post with different categories, so different type of, you know, if it's a logo or a medical, you know, doctor or whatever the content is. So yeah, I would say the product goes in a SharePoint communication site. While they're working creating, they do it in Teams with the integration with Adobe Suite. That'd be my suggestion.
I would agree with that.
Okay, cool.
Very good. Any other questions from the gang? Thank you for being stalwarts and hanging on all the way to the end.
On a Friday before a holiday.
On a Friday. Yeah, no kidding. Pretty much 4 o'clock Central. All right, so don't forget to be able to take that survey. Everybody, round of applause for Shari. Great back-to-back sessions. Way to go. And I know you guys were waiting for this. The $25 gift card is gonna go to Stefan. And I'm not even going to pronounce the last name, Shanane, for that. So if you, good job on that, we'll reach out and get you that gift card. Otherwise, everybody, thank you for attending the admin day. We look forward to maybe seeing you again in a future admin day. Otherwise, join us for our user group that happen monthly. Everything's at MN365.org for all that. Thank you again, Shari. Way to go.
My pleasure. Thank you, Don, for your help and support, and Michelle and your whole team for putting the event together. It's a lot of work. I have aspirations of creating a productivity-based one, but yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, yes.
Yeah, it's a little bit. It's a little. Thank you so much, Shari, though. That was a lot of time. 3 hours. I mean, just huge. Thank you. Hopefully you can just go relax and collapse.
Oh, you're guys. Only for you, Michelle. Only for you.
Love you, honey.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Have a good Thanksgiving, everybody. Bye.
You too. Happy Thanksgiving.